November 1944. The skies above Nazi-occupied Europe are alive with the constant thunder of war. Allied bombers and fighter escorts cross the continent daily, striking German factories, railways, and airfields in an effort to weaken the Nazi war machine. Among those pilots is American fighter pilot Bob Hoover, flying combat missions over enemy territory. High above the ground, Hoover's aircraft cuts through cold air as anti-aircraft fire erupts around him. German flak batteries are firing from below, filling the sky with exploding shells. Suddenly, a violent explosion bursts near his aircraft. The impact shudders through the fuselage. Metal fragments tear into the plane. The engine sputters. Smoke begins pouring from the damaged wing. Hoover immediately understands what has happened. His aircraft is critically damaged, and he is deep inside Germany. There is no chance of making it back to Allied territory. With the engine failing and the aircraft losing altitude rapidly, Hoover has only seconds to decide what to do. He searches the ground below for a place to land, but the landscape offers little hope. Fields, forests, and small German villages stretch in every direction. Still, he has no choice. He guides the crippled aircraft downward as carefully as he can. Moments later, the fighter slams into a snowy field and skids violently across the ground before finally coming to a stop. The cockpit fills with the smell of smoke and burning metal. Hoover quickly climbs out of the wreckage. Within minutes, German soldiers arrive, weapons raised. The war that Hoover had been fighting in the air is suddenly over. He is captured and taken into custody. An American fighter pilot who had started the day in the skies now finds himself a prisoner of war inside Nazi Germany. Hoover is transported to a German prisoner of war camp used to hold captured Allied airmen. Inside the camp are dozens of British and American pilots who were shot down during bombing missions over Germany. The compound is surrounded by tall barbed wire fences. Guard towers rise above the yard. German soldiers patrol the perimeter day and night. Searchlights sweep across the camp after dark. Escape attempts are dangerous and rarely successful. But inside the camp, something interesting becomes clear to Hoover. These prisoners are not ordinary soldiers. They are pilots, and pilots are trained to analyze problems. They observe everything: guard movements, fence locations, blind spots in the patrol routes. Every detail becomes important. Inside the camp, conversations constantly turn toward the same subject: escape. Some prisoners dig tunnels, others attempt disguises. Several attempts fail. Those who are caught are punished and returned to the camp. Still, the prisoners continue planning, because every man knows the same truth. If they remain inside the camp, they are completely dependent on the outcome of the war. But if they escape, they might return to Allied lines and rejoin the fight. Weeks turn into months. Winter tightens its grip across Europe. News from the outside world arrives slowly, carried by rumors and whispers. But one thing becomes increasingly clear: Germany is losing the war. And as Allied forces move closer to Germany itself, the situation inside the camp begins to change. As the war progresses, German forces begin moving prisoners between camps. Transportation becomes chaotic. Guards are stretched thin. Security becomes less organized. During one of these movements, Hoover sees an opportunity. In the confusion of a prisoner transfer, Hoover and several other Allied prisoners manage to slip away from their guards. There are no explosions, no dramatic gunfight, just a brief moment when the guards are distracted, and suddenly the prisoners disappear. They scatter into the surrounding countryside. But escaping the camp is only the beginning. The real challenge now begins. They are still deep inside enemy territory. German patrols search for escaped prisoners. Every road could contain soldiers. Every village could report them. To avoid being discovered, Hoover and the others traveled mostly at night. During the day, they hide in forests and barns. The countryside is cold and unfamiliar. Food is scarce.
and moving safely across occupied Germany is extremely dangerous. After several days, the escapees become separated. Hoover eventually finds himself alone, a single American pilot hiding in the German countryside, with no map, no documents, and no clear route to Allied territory. Then, one day, while moving carefully through the countryside, he notices something unexpected in the distance: an airfield. Hoover moves closer and studies the airfield carefully from a concealed position. Several aircraft are parked along the runway, German fighters. Maintenance vehicles move slowly around the field. Ground crews work on aircraft. The airfield is active but not heavily defended. Then Hoover notices one aircraft in particular, a Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 is one of the most powerful fighter aircraft used by the German Luftwaffe. It is fast, heavily armed, and feared by Allied pilots. But right now, Hoover notices something else. The aircraft appears unattended. The idea that forms in his mind seems almost impossible, but it may also be his only chance. If he can reach the aircraft, if he can start the engine, he might be able to fly the aircraft out of Germany. The risks are enormous. If the Germans see him, he will almost certainly be killed. Even if he manages to take off, Allied forces might mistake the aircraft for an enemy fighter and shoot it down. But traveling across Germany on foot is nearly impossible. Flying may be the only way. So Hoover waits. He studies the airfield carefully, watching the movements of mechanics and soldiers, looking for the moment when no one is watching the aircraft. Eventually, the opportunity arrives. The area around the aircraft grows quiet. Hoover decides to act. Hoover moves quickly across the airfield. Every step is dangerous. If anyone notices him, the escape attempt will end immediately. But the airfield remains quiet. He reaches the FW-190. The aircraft sits silently on the grass. Hoover climbs into the cockpit. Inside, the controls are unfamiliar. German labels cover the instruments. The switches and gauges look different from the aircraft he normally flies. But Hoover is an experienced pilot. He understands how aircraft systems work. Fuel, ignition, throttle. The basic principles remain the same. Working quickly, he begins the startup procedure. For a moment, nothing happens. Then suddenly, the powerful engine roars to life. The propeller spins rapidly as the aircraft vibrates beneath him. The sound echoes across the airfield. Anyone nearby could hear it. There is no time to hesitate. Hoover pushes the throttle forward. The aircraft begins rolling down the runway. Speed increases rapidly. Seconds later, the fighter lifts off the ground. The aircraft climbs into the sky. In that moment, something extraordinary has happened. An American prisoner of war has just stolen a Nazi fighter plane. But the danger is far from over. Hoover is flying a German fighter aircraft over Germany. To German radar operators, he appears to be one of their own pilots. But to Allied forces, the aircraft will look exactly like the enemy. If Allied fighters intercept him, they may attack without hesitation. Hoover flies carefully, heading west toward Allied territory. Whenever possible, he flies low, using terrain to stay hidden. The flight feels long and tense. Every minute in the air carries risk. Enemy fighters could appear. Anti-aircraft guns could fire. Eventually, the landscape begins to change. He is approaching Allied-controlled territory. But one final challenge remains. As Hoover approaches an Allied airfield, anti-aircraft crews see the approaching aircraft. To them, it appears to be a German fighter. They prepare to fire. Hoover lowers the landing gear and begins a slow approach. Something about the aircraft's cautious approach causes the gunners to hesitate. The fighter touches down on the runway. The aircraft rolls to a stop. Soldiers rush toward the plane with weapons raised. They expect to capture a German pilot. Instead, the cockpit opens, and an American pilot climbs out. Bob Hoover has successfully flown a stolen German fighter back to Allied territory. Hoover's escape quickly spreads through Allied forces. Escaping from a German prisoner of war camp is already rare, but stealing an enemy fighter and flying it to freedom is almost unbelievable. Yet, that is exactly what happened. Hoover returns to service and continues flying missions during the war. But his story does not end there. After World War II, Hoover becomes one of the most respected pilots in aviation. He becomes a test pilot, flying experimental aircraft and pushing the limits of aviation technology. Later, he becomes a legendary airshow pilot, famous for performing incredible maneuvers that demonstrate extraordinary control and precision. Pilots around the world admire his flying ability. But even among all his achievements, one story remains the most remarkable. The day he escaped captivity inside Nazi Germany. The day he walked onto an enemy airfield, climbed into a German fighter plane, and flew it home.